The morning sun cast long shadows across downtown Denver as Marcus Rodriguez adjusted his radio equipment on the 42nd floor of the abandoned Wells Fargo building. 3 months had passed since the outbreak began, and the former telecommunications engineer had become the unofficial coordinator for the remaining survivor groups scattered throughout the Rocky Mountain region. His weathered hands moved methodically over the dials, searching for any sign of life beyond the static that had become the soundtrack of this new world. Below him, the streets that once bustled with morning commuters now crawled with the infected, thousands of them wandering aimlessly through the urban maze, their decomposing bodies creating a putrid carpet of death that stretched as far as the eye could see. Marcus pressed the transmit button and spoke into the microphone with practiced urgency. "This is Denver base calling all stations. Day 93 post-outbreak. If anyone is receiving this transmission, please respond immediately. We have critical intelligence about coordinated infected movements heading toward established safe zones." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant moans echoing up from the street level and the occasional crash of debris as the infected stumbled through storefronts and abandoned vehicles. Detective Emily Watson crouched behind the rusted remains of a city bus, her service weapon trained on the group of infected shuffling through the intersection ahead. Her police training had prepared her for many scenarios, but nothing could have readied her for this nightmare that had consumed her beloved hometown of Atlanta. The CDC headquarters, once a beacon of hope and scientific advancement, now stood as a monument to humanity's failure to contain what they had accidentally unleashed. Emily's radio crackled to life with Marcus's transmission from over 1,000 miles away, and she felt a surge of hope mixed with desperate urgency. She whispered into her radio, "Denver base, this is Atlanta survivor Watson. Reading you loud and clear. I'm currently positioned 3 blocks south of the CDC facility and can confirm your intel. The infected are moving in coordinated patterns, almost like they're being directed by something or someone. I've observed groups of over 200 moving in formation toward the last known survivor camps in the suburbs." She paused, watching as a particularly large infected male in a torn business suit seemed to be leading a group of smaller infected toward a building where she knew civilians were hiding. "There's something else, Denver base. Some of these infected are displaying behaviors that suggest they're retaining fragments of their former intelligence. They're using tools, opening doors, and worst of all, they're communicating with each other through a series of guttural sounds that almost resemble a primitive language." Dr. James Mitchell wiped the sweat from his brow as he worked frantically in his makeshift laboratory, constructed in the basement of a fortified farmhouse 30 miles outside of what used to be Kansas City. The former CDC virologist had been working around the clock since escaping the initial outbreak at the research facility where the virus had first emerged. His hands shook slightly as he examined blood samples under his improvised microscope setup, powered by a jury-rigged solar panel system that his teammate had assembled from salvaged electronics. "The virus is evolving faster than we initially predicted," he muttered to himself, making notes on a piece of scavenged paper. Through his radio equipment, he had been monitoring Marcus's transmissions and Emily's reports, and the information painted a terrifying picture of an enemy that was becoming more sophisticated with each passing day. He grabbed his radio and joined the conversation. "Denver base and Atlanta survivor, this is Dr. Mitchell transmitting from Kansas Research Station. I've been analyzing tissue samples from recently deceased infected, and the cellular mutation rate is accelerating exponentially. What you're observing in terms of coordinated behavior isn't coincidental. The virus is essentially rewiring their neural pathways, creating a primitive but effective collective intelligence. We're not just fighting mindless zombies anymore, we're facing an evolving predator species that's learning to hunt us more efficiently." Captain Lisa Thompson moved silently through the abandoned corridors of Fort Carson, her military boots making barely a whisper against the concrete floor as she led her squad of 12 remaining soldiers toward the armory. The base had fallen within the first week of the outbreak, but Lisa and her team had managed to barricade themselves in the underground bunker system, surviving on military rations and determination. Her radio buzzed with the ongoing conversation between the civilian survivors, and she realized that their isolated position might actually be an advantage in the larger fight for survival. "All stations, this is Fort Carson Military Remnant," she transmitted quietly. "Captain Thompson here with 12 active personnel and access to significant weapons cache and armored vehicles. Based on your reports about coordinated infected behavior, I believe we need to start thinking strategically about establishing a unified resistance network. The infected may be evolving, but they haven't developed military tactics yet, and that's our window of opportunity." She gestured for her squad to continue their advance toward the weapons storage while she continued her transmission. I'm proposing we establish a series of interconnected safe zones with overlapping fields of fire and coordinated supply lines. If these things are getting smarter, we need to get organized fast because individual survival isn't going to cut it much longer. The darkness of the abandoned subway tunnels beneath New York City provided the perfect cover for the group of 37 survivors who had been living underground for the past 2 months. Jake Sullivan, a former construction foreman who had been working on the subway expansion project when the outbreak hit, had become their unofficial leader through his intimate knowledge of the tunnel systems that sprawled like arteries beneath the infected city above. His calloused hands gripped a crowbar as he listened to the radio chatter between the survivors across the country, realizing that their isolated group might hold a crucial piece of the puzzle in humanity's fight for survival. "The tunnels connect everything," he whispered into his radio, his voice echoing slightly in the concrete chamber they had converted into their main communications hub. "Denver base, Atlanta, Kansas, and Fort Carson. This is New York Underground. We've been mapping the infected movement patterns from below, and there's something you all need to know. The infected aren't just coordinating on street level. They're using infrastructure, storm drains, maintenance tunnels, even abandoned subway lines to move unseen between areas." Jake paused as he heard the distant sound of scratching echoing through the tunnels, a sound that had become all too familiar as the infected had learned to navigate the underground passages. "They're creating a network beneath our feet and we think they're building up for something big." Meanwhile, in a fortified shopping mall outside Phoenix, Arizona, Maria Gonzalez was proving that survival required more than just weapons and walls. It demanded hope and community. The former elementary school teacher had gathered nearly 80 survivors, including 17 children, and had transformed the abandoned retail space into a functioning micro-society complete with hydroponic gardens, a medical bay, and even a small school where she continued teaching the children despite the apocalyptic circumstances outside. Her radio crackled with Jake's transmission from New York, and she felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the implications of underground infected movements. "New York Underground, this is Phoenix Community Base," she responded while watching her husband Roberto reinforce the barricaded entrances with additional steel plating. "Your intel explains the coordinated attacks we've been experiencing here. 3 nights ago, infected emerged from storm drains simultaneously at 4 different points around our perimeter. We managed to repel them, but they retreated in an organized fashion rather than the chaotic scattering we used to see." She glanced toward the children's area where her daughter Sophia was reading to a group of younger kids, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy in their nightmarish world. "The infected are definitely learning from their failures and adapting their tactics. We need to share defensive strategies immediately because traditional zombie survival methods aren't working anymore." Dr. Mitchell's hands trembled as he studied the latest batch of viral samples under his microscope, the implications of his findings sending waves of terror through his scientific mind. The virus wasn't just evolving randomly, it was exhibiting signs of directed mutation, almost as if it possessed an intelligence of its own that was actively working to improve its host's capabilities. His radio buzzed with reports from Jake and Maria, confirming his worst fears about the infected's increasing sophistication. "All stations, this is Kansas Research Station with an urgent update," he transmitted, his voice barely concealing his panic. "The viral evolution isn't random. Based on my analysis, the virus is essentially performing real-time genetic engineering on its hosts, enhancing their physical capabilities while preserving just enough brain function to maintain coordination and basic problem-solving skills." He stood up from his microscope and walked to the small window that looked out over the Kansas farmland, where he could see small groups of infected moving across the fields in what appeared to be search patterns. The infected are becoming stronger, faster, and more intelligent with each generation. The virus is turning them into the perfect predator species, and at the current rate of evolution, we estimate that within another month, they'll possess cognitive abilities that rival uninfected humans while maintaining their supernatural physical advantages. Captain Thompson's military experience told her that the situation had just escalated from a survival scenario to an extinction-level threat. The reports coming in from across the country painted a picture of an enemy that was not only adapting but actively evolving to counter human defensive strategies. She gathered her remaining squad in the Fort Carson Command Center, spreading out maps of the continental United States and marking the known survivor locations based on the radio communications they had been monitoring. "Listen up, people," she addressed her team while simultaneously broadcasting to all stations. "Based on the intelligence we're receiving, we're looking at a coordinated nationwide threat that's using infrastructure systems to move undetected and mount synchronized attacks on survivor communities. She pointed to various locations on the map where red pins marked confirmed infected concentrations. The enemy is displaying military-level tactical awareness, which means our survival depends on establishing a unified command structure and coordinated defense network immediately. I'm proposing Operation Dead Reckoning, a systematic plan to link all survivor communities through secure communication networks, shared intelligence and coordinated supply runs using our remaining military assets. The weight of leadership pressed down on her shoulders as she realized that the decisions made in the next few days would determine whether humanity had any chance of survival against this evolving nightmare that had once been their friends, families, and neighbors. The first coordinated strike came at dawn, just as the survivor communities were beginning to implement Captain Thompson's proposed defense network. In Seattle, Washington, former firefighter David Chin and his team of 43 survivors had barricaded themselves inside the Space Needle, using its height advantage to monitor infected movements across the city while establishing one of the northern communication relay points for Operation Dead Reckoning. David was adjusting the radio antenna when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Thousands of infected were emerging from building entrances, storm drains, and subway exits in perfect synchronization, moving with military precision toward survivor strongholds throughout the city. All stations, this is Seattle Tower with emergency alert, he shouted into his radio while grabbing his binoculars to get a better view of the unfolding nightmare below. Massive coordinated assault in progress. The infected are attacking every known survivor location simultaneously. This isn't random, they've been planning this. His voice cracked with urgency as he watched infected using crude tools to break through barricades while others climbed buildings with an agility that defied their decomposing appearance. The most terrifying sight was a group of infected that appeared to be directing the others, pointing toward specific targets and organizing the assault with tactical awareness that rivaled human military operations. David's wife Rachel appeared beside him, her face pale as she witnessed the systematic destruction of everything they had worked to build. "They know where we are," she whispered, "all of us." In Miami, Florida, Coast Guard Lieutenant Commander Angela Rodriguez had been monitoring marine approaches to the mainland when she received David's emergency transmission. Her floating command center, constructed from 3 connected fishing vessels anchored 2 miles offshore, had served as a crucial supply link for coastal survivor communities. Through her high-powered telescopes, she could see the infected assault unfolding along the Miami shoreline, but what terrified her most was the sight of infected wading into the ocean with apparent purpose and direction. "Seattle Tower and all stations, this is Miami Marine Command," she transmitted while ordering her crew to prepare for immediate departure to deeper waters. "The infected have found a way to coordinate across vast distances. We're witnessing simultaneous attacks from coast to coast, which means they're communicating through methods we don't understand." She watched in horror as infected climbed onto abandoned boats and began attempting to navigate toward her position, their movements suggesting they understood her floating sanctuary posed a threat to their objectives. The infection has reached a critical evolution threshold. They're not just hunting individual survivors anymore, they're conducting strategic warfare against organized human resistance. Dr. Mitchell's worst fears were materializing before his eyes as reports flooded in from across the nation detailing the synchronized assault on survivor communities. His research had predicted this moment, but experiencing it firsthand sent waves of terror through his scientific mind. The virus had essentially created a biological internet, allowing infected individuals to share information instantaneously across vast distances through mechanisms he was only beginning to understand. "All stations receiving, this is Kansas Research Station with critical analysis," he transmitted while frantically reviewing his data on viral communication methods. The coordinated attacks confirmed that the virus has developed a form of distributed consciousness. Individual infected are functioning as nodes in a larger network, sharing sensory information and tactical data in real time. He paused to wipe sweat from his brow, knowing that his next words would change everything. The infected aren't just evolving physically, they're developing into a collective intelligence that's learning to wage war against humanity using our own infrastructure and tactical knowledge against us. Through his window, he could see infected moving across the Kansas farmland in perfect formation, their numbers growing as they systematically overran every human settlement in their path. "We're not fighting zombies anymore. We're fighting a new species that's specifically designed to hunt and eliminate humanity, and they're winning." Marcus Rodriguez felt the building shake as infected began their assault on the Wells Fargo Tower, their coordinated attack suggesting they had identified his radio equipment as a critical target in the human communication network. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the building as hundreds of infected poured through the lower floors, moving with terrifying efficiency toward his position. His radio crackled with desperate transmissions from survivor communities across the country, each reporting similar coordinated assaults that were systematically dismantling the resistance network before it could be fully established. "All surviving stations, this is Denver base possibly signing off," he transmitted while grabbing his emergency pack and preparing to abandon his position. "The infected have identified our communication hubs as primary targets. They're not just attacking survivors, they're destroying our ability to coordinate resistance." The sound of footsteps echoed in the stairwell below as infected climbed toward his position with mechanical determination. "Operation Dead Reckoning may be our last hope, but we need to find a way to communicate without using fixed installations. The enemy has learned to track our radio transmissions and is using that information to eliminate our leadership and coordination capabilities." As Marcus prepared to rappel down the exterior of the building, he realized that humanity's fight for survival had just entered a new and terrifying phase where the infected possessed advantages that traditional zombie survival tactics couldn't counter. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. The evacuation began with desperate urgency as survivor communities across the nation abandoned their established strongholds and scattered into the wilderness, hoping that mobility might give them an advantage against an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. In the mountains of Colorado, Park Ranger Thomas Blake led a convoy of 17 vehicles carrying over 100 survivors through treacherous backcountry roads that only his decades of wilderness experience could navigate safely. The former ranger had spent his career protecting these mountains from human encroachment, never imagining he would one day be leading humanity's remnants through the same terrain to escape an enemy that had once been human. "Stay tight on the convoy," he radioed to the vehicle behind him while scanning the tree line for any signs of infected movement. "The terrain is our advantage now, but only if we keep moving and avoid establishing patterns they can predict." His radio crackled with fragmentary transmissions from other survivor groups attempting similar evacuations, creating a patchwork of desperate voices trying to coordinate movement without revealing their locations to the infected collective intelligence that seemed capable of monitoring all electronic communications. Through his rearview mirror, Thomas could see Maria Gonzalez's distinctive red pickup truck carrying several children from the Phoenix community, their young faces pressed against the windows as they watched their former world disappear behind them. Captain Thompson's military convoy had been forced to abandon Fort Carson after the infected demonstrated an unsettling ability to breach even fortified military installations through coordinated assault tactics that seemed to exploit every weakness in human defensive planning. Her convoy of armored vehicles now moved through the Wyoming wilderness, carrying not only her remaining military personnel but also crucial equipment and weapons that might represent humanity's last hope for organized resistance. "All mobile units, this is Nomad Command," she transmitted using the new tactical communication protocols designed to avoid detection by the infected network. "Intelligence indicates the enemy is tracking our movement patterns and predicting our destinations based on resource requirements and terrain analysis." She studied the tactical map spread across the dashboard of her command vehicle, noting the scattered reports of other survivor groups moving through the American wilderness like scattered refugees from their own planet. "We need to establish temporary rally points rather than permanent bases, rotating our positions every 72 hours maximum to stay ahead of their predictive capabilities." The weight of command felt heavier than ever as she realized that traditional military doctrine was useless against an enemy that learned from every engagement and adapted their tactics in real time. Dr. Mitchell had barely escaped his Kansas research station with his viral samples and research data before the infected overran the facility, forcing him to establish a mobile laboratory in the back of a converted RV that Jake Sullivan's New York team had managed to acquire during their evacuation from the subway tunnels. The cramped conditions made detailed research nearly impossible, but Mitchell continued his analysis while the vehicle bounced along rural highways, driven by Jake's steady hands and intimate knowledge of back roads that might keep them ahead of the infected pursuit. "The viral evolution is accelerating beyond our worst projections," Mitchell reported through encrypted radio communications while trying to maintain his microscope focus despite the vehicle's constant motion. "Each generation of infected is demonstrating enhanced cognitive abilities, improved physical coordination, and most disturbing of all, the capacity for long-term strategic planning that extends beyond immediate tactical situations." His latest tissue samples revealed cellular modifications that defied conventional understanding of biological evolution, suggesting the virus was implementing changes that would normally require millions of years of natural selection. The infected are developing specialized roles within their collective structure: scouts, warriors, coordinators, and what appears to be a command hierarchy that's becoming more sophisticated with each passing day. Emily Watson's police training had prepared her for pursuit situations, but fleeing through the Georgia wilderness while being hunted by an enemy that never tired, never stopped, and seemed to anticipate her every move pushed her tactical skills beyond their limits. Her group of 23 survivors moved through dense forests using hiking trails and deer paths that she hoped would confuse the infected tracking algorithms, but the sound of systematic searching echoed through the trees around them like a tightening noose. "They're hurting us," she whispered into her radio while crouched behind a fallen log, watching infected move through the forest in coordinated search patterns that reminded her of police manhunts she had participated in during her law enforcement career. The infected aren't just pursuing random survivors, they're implementing containment strategies designed to funnel us towards specific locations. Her radio crackled with similar reports from other fleeing groups, painting a terrifying picture of an enemy that was conducting a nationwide operation to systematically eliminate organized human resistance while capturing survivors for unknown purposes. The most chilling realization was that the infected seemed to understand human psychology and were using fear and exhaustion as weapons, driving survivor groups to make desperate mistakes that would make them easier to capture. Emily checked her ammunition count and realized that running was no longer a sustainable strategy. Soon humanity would have to make a stand, and when that moment came, they would need every advantage they could create to survive against an enemy that had evolved specifically to hunt them. The convergence began when scattered survivor groups started receiving identical radio transmissions on emergency frequencies, broadcasting coordinates for a rally point in the remote wilderness of Montana's Glacier National Park. Former NASA communications specialist Jennifer Walsh had been working with Angela Rodriguez's Marine Command to establish a new type of communication network that used burst transmissions and frequency hopping to avoid detection by the infected collective intelligence. "All surviving units, this is Phoenix Network Control," Jennifer transmitted from her improvised communication station aboard Angela's floating command center. "We've identified a location that offers maximum defensive advantages with multiple escape routes and natural barriers that should impede infected coordination abilities." Her technical background had proven invaluable in developing communication methods that exploited gaps in the infected's learning algorithms, using random timing intervals and encrypted messages that changed every few hours. "Converge on coordinates 48.7596 north, 113.7870 west for Operation Final Stand. This may be our last opportunity to pool our resources and establish an effective resistance." The transmission repeated across multiple frequencies, reaching survivor groups scattered throughout the American wilderness and offering the first hope for organized resistance since the coordinated attacks had shattered their established communities. Marcus Rodriguez had managed to escape Denver with crucial radio equipment and was now traveling with Thomas Blake's convoy through the Colorado mountains when they received Jennifer's transmission. The coordinates indicated a location deep in Montana's wilderness that would require careful coordination to reach without alerting the infected to their movements. "Thomas, can your mountain experience get us to those coordinates without using major highways?" Marcus asked while studying topographic maps spread across the hood of their vehicle during a brief stop in a hidden valley. "The infected have demonstrated they can monitor traffic patterns and predict our movements, so we need to find routes that avoid their surveillance network." Thomas traced several possible paths through remote mountain passes that would add days to their journey but might allow them to reach the rally point undetected. "It's possible, but we'll need to travel at night and use trails that most people don't even know exist," Thomas replied while checking his compass and GPS coordinates. "The question is whether other groups have the wilderness skills to navigate similar routes, or if we'll be walking into a trap where the infected are already waiting for us." Dr. Mitchell's mobile laboratory had joined with Jake Sullivan's convoy after both groups recognized that their combined expertise might be crucial for humanity's survival. Mitchell's continuing research revealed that the infected were developing even more sophisticated capabilities, including the ability to modify their own biological functions in response to environmental challenges. "The viral intelligence is learning to overcome every obstacle we've encountered," Mitchell reported during one of their encrypted communication windows while both convoys moved through the Dakota Badlands toward the Montana rally point. "Recent tissue samples show the infected have developed enhanced cold resistance, improved night vision, and what appears to be a primitive form of tool creation ability that's advancing rapidly." His most disturbing discovery was evidence that the infected were beginning to show signs of individual personality preservation within their collective consciousness, suggesting they retained fragments of their human memories and skills while serving the viral network's objectives. "We're not just fighting an intelligent virus, We're fighting the accumulated knowledge and skills of everyone who's been infected, organized into a collective intelligence that's dedicated to eliminating the remaining uninfected population. Captain Thompson's military convoy had encountered several other survivor groups during their journey toward the Montana coordinates, and she had begun organizing them into a more effective fighting force using her tactical expertise and remaining military equipment. The combined group now consisted of over 300 survivors with various skills and backgrounds, representing one of the largest organized human forces remaining in North America. "We're building something that might actually have a chance," she radioed to the other convoy leaders while her combined force moved through the Wyoming wilderness under cover of darkness. "The infected have been successful because they've been fighting scattered, disorganized groups using superior numbers and coordination. But if we can reach that rally point and establish a unified command structure with proper defensive positions, we might be able to turn their own tactics against them." Her military assessment of the situation suggested that the Montana location offered natural choke points and defensive advantages that could force the infected to attack in smaller, more manageable groups rather than overwhelming human positions with massive coordinated assaults. The infected may have evolved superior individual capabilities, but they're still vulnerable to concentrated firepower and strategic defensive positioning. If we can force them to fight on our terms instead of theirs, we might have a chance to prove that human intelligence and adaptability can still triumph over viral evolution. As her convoy crested a ridge and saw the distant peaks of Montana in the moonlight, Thompson felt the first stirring of hope she had experienced since the outbreak began, knowing that the final confrontation between humanity and the infected would determine whether civilization could survive or if the planet would belong to an entirely new species that had once been human. The arrival at Glacier National Park's remote mountain valley revealed the scope of humanity's desperate gamble as convoy after convoy emerged from hidden mountain passes and forest trails, bringing together the largest gathering of survivors since the outbreak began. Over 800 people had answered Jennifer Walsh's call, representing dozens of survivor communities from across the continent who had risked everything to reach this isolated location. Camp construction began immediately under Captain Thompson's military coordination, with survivors using their diverse skills to establish defensive positions among the natural rock formations and dense pine forests that surrounded the valley floor. Former construction worker Pete Johnson led teams in building reinforced barricades from fallen timber and salvaged materials, while emergency room nurse Patricia Davis organized medical stations and triage areas in preparation for the battle everyone knew was coming. "This is our line in the sand," Marcus Rodriguez announced over the camp's new communication system as he coordinated radio networks with survivors who possessed technical expertise from their former lives. "The infected collective intelligence knows we're here, and they're undoubtedly planning their response to this concentration of uninfected humans. We have perhaps 72 hours before they launch their assault, and every minute counts in preparing our defenses." Dr. Mitchell established his most sophisticated laboratory yet in a reinforced cave system that provided natural protection while allowing him to continue his crucial research into the viral evolution patterns. His latest findings painted a terrifying picture of an enemy that had learned to anticipate human behavior with mathematical precision, but also revealed potential vulnerabilities in the infected's collective consciousness that might be exploited. "The viral network operates on frequency patterns similar to neural networks," he explained to the assembled leadership council while displaying his research data on improvised projection equipment. "Individual infected function as nodes in a biological internet, but like any network, it has bandwidth limitations and processing delays when handling massive amounts of information simultaneously." His research suggested that the infected collective intelligence might be overwhelmed if forced to coordinate attacks against multiple targets while processing complex tactical scenarios that exceeded their computational capacity. "If we can force them to divide their attention and create multiple crisis points simultaneously, we might be able to exploit the lag time in their decision-making process and create openings for effective counterattacks." Emily Watson's police experience proved invaluable in organizing perimeter security and early warning systems throughout the Mountain Valley, working with Jake Sullivan's knowledge of infrastructure to create detection networks that might provide advance warning of infected approach routes. Her teams established observation posts on the surrounding peaks and implemented communication protocols that would allow rapid response to any signs of infected movement toward their position. "They're coming," she reported during the second night after most groups had arrived, her voice steady despite the gravity of her words. "Our long-range scouts are detecting massive infected concentrations moving toward our general area from multiple directions. The numbers are unlike anything we've observed before, tens of thousands, possibly more, all moving with coordinated precision toward this valley. Her tactical assessment revealed that the infected had abandoned their usual strategy of small, targeted strikes and were instead marshalling what appeared to be every infected individual within a 1,000-mile radius for a single, overwhelming assault. This is their endgame strategy. They're committing everything to eliminate organized human resistance once and for all, which means they either wipe us out completely or we somehow find a way to break their collective consciousness and turn the tide of this war. Angela Rodriguez's Marine Command had transported additional survivors and crucial supplies up the mountain rivers using shallow draft boats, but her most important contribution was the mobile communications array that provided the camp with real-time intelligence about infected movements across the broader region. Her naval background and strategic planning helped coordinate the diverse survivor groups into something resembling an organized military force, despite the fact that most had never worked together before and came from wildly different backgrounds and skill sets. The infected are demonstrating unprecedented coordination, she reported to the Leadership Council while updating tactical maps with the latest intelligence from scout teams and radio intercepts. They're not just converging on our position, they're implementing a sophisticated siege strategy that includes cutting off our escape routes and establishing containment perimeters to prevent any survivors from breaking out if their initial assault fails. The scope of the infected operation suggested they had evolved beyond simple predator behavior and were now capable of complex military planning that took into account multiple contingencies and strategic objectives. They understand that this gathering represents the largest threat to their dominance since the outbreak began, and they're responding with overwhelming force designed to eliminate any possibility of organized human resistance surviving beyond this battle. Tomorrow's fight won't just determine our fate, it will decide whether humanity has any future on this planet or if we become extinct, replaced by a species that evolved specifically to hunt and eliminate us. The final battle began before dawn when Emily Watson's perimeter scouts reported massive waves of infected emerging from the forest on all sides of the valley, their movements synchronized with military precision that sent chills through even the most experienced survivors. The infected had evolved beyond recognition. These creatures moved with fluid coordination, communicated through complex sound patterns, and demonstrated tactical awareness that rivaled human military planning. Captain Thompson's voice echoed across the camp through the communication system as she coordinated defensive positions from her command post atop the highest rocky outcropping. All units, this is command. Enemy contact imminent on all fronts. Execute defensive plan Alpha and remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves, we're fighting for the future of humanity itself. The sight that greeted the defenders was beyond their worst nightmares, tens of thousands of infected streaming down the mountainsides like a living avalanche, their decomposing forms moving with unnatural speed and purpose while emitting coordinated howls that seemed designed to strike terror into human hearts. Dr. Mitchell's voice crackled over the radio with urgent scientific analysis even as the battle commenced. The infected are displaying pack hunting behaviors combined with swarm intelligence tactics. They're using psychological warfare by deliberately creating terrifying visual and auditory stimuli to break our defensive cohesion before the physical assault begins. Marcus Rodriguez coordinated communication between defensive positions while Thomas Blake led mountain warfare specialists in implementing guerrilla tactics designed to exploit the rugged terrain advantages. The infected demonstrated their evolved capabilities by scaling cliff faces that should have been impossible to climb and coordinating multi-directional attacks that forced the human defenders to split their attention and resources across multiple crisis points simultaneously. They're learning from every defensive move we make, Thomas reported while leading a counterattack against infected who had breached the outer perimeter through a narrow canyon approach that the humans had considered impassable. Each wave is adapting to overcome the tactics that worked against the previous wave, which means we're essentially fighting an enemy that becomes more effective with every engagement. The infected collective intelligence was processing battlefield information in real time and adjusting their assault strategies faster than human defenders could adapt their responses, creating a horrifying scenario where traditional military tactics became less effective with each passing minute. Jake Sullivan's knowledge of structural engineering proved crucial as he led teams in creating improvised explosive devices and structural collapse points that could channel infected movements into predetermined kill zones where concentrated firepower could be most effective. Patricia Davis worked frantically in the medical stations, treating wounded defenders while also serving as a crucial morale leader who kept survivors focused on their shared humanity rather than descending into panic and chaos. "We're holding the line," she announced over the communication system while bandaging a scout who had barely escaped an infected flanking maneuver. "Every minute we survive proves that human ingenuity and cooperation can stand against this nightmare. We're not just fighting monsters, We're proving that civilization and hope can survive even in the face of extinction-level threats. Her words provided emotional anchor points for defenders who were witnessing capabilities in the infected that defied everything they thought they knew about zombie behavior, including tool use, tactical coordination, and what appeared to be emotional manipulation designed to exploit human psychological vulnerabilities. The turning point came when Dr. Mitchell's research finally yielded actionable intelligence about the infected collective consciousness during the height of the battle, when the viral network was operating at maximum capacity and processing enormous amounts of sensory data from thousands of individual infected units simultaneously. "I've found it," he shouted over the radio while monitoring viral communication patterns from his cave laboratory. "The collective intelligence has processing limitations when coordinating massive simultaneous operations. If we can create enough crisis points requiring individual decision-making by infected units, we can overload their network capacity and cause temporary system failures in their coordination." His discovery revealed that while the infected collective was incredibly sophisticated, it still operated under biological constraints that could be exploited by forcing the viral network to exceed its computational bandwidth through strategic chaos creation. Jennifer Walsh immediately began coordinating with all defensive positions to implement Dr. Mitchell's strategy, using her NASA communications expertise to organize simultaneous multi-point operations designed to overwhelm the infected's collective decision-making capacity. "All units execute Operation Chaos Storm," she transmitted to defensive positions throughout the valley. "Create maximum confusion and force individual infected to make independent decisions simultaneously across all sectors. We're going to break their network by overloading their processing capacity with more tactical scenarios than their collective consciousness can handle effectively." The implementation of this strategy would determine whether human intelligence and adaptability could overcome viral evolution, or if this desperate last stand would mark the end of organized human resistance against an enemy that had learned to hunt them with terrifying efficiency. The breakthrough came as Operation Chaos Storm reached its crescendo, with human defenders implementing coordinated confusion tactics across dozens of simultaneous engagement points throughout the mountain valley. Captain Thompson's military precision combined with the diverse expertise of hundreds of survivors created a perfect storm of tactical unpredictability that exceeded the infected collective's ability to process and respond effectively. Explosions echoed through the valley as Jake Sullivan's improvised demolitions created structural collapses that forced infected units to make individual navigation decisions, while Marcus Rodriguez coordinated radio jamming operations that disrupted the viral network's communication frequencies. The infected response became increasingly erratic as their collective intelligence struggled to maintain coordination while processing the overwhelming complexity of multiple crisis scenarios occurring simultaneously across their operational theater. "It's working," Emily Watson reported from her position overlooking the main infected assault routes, her voice filled with amazement as she witnessed something unprecedented since the outbreak began. "The infected are losing coordination and reverting to individual behaviors. They're acting confused, disoriented, almost like they're waking up from a collective dream." Individual infected began wandering aimlessly, their purposeful movements replaced by the shambling, mindless behavior that characterized traditional zombie mythology, suggesting that the viral network's collective consciousness was experiencing systematic failures under the computational strain. Dr. Mitchell's real-time analysis confirmed that the infected collective intelligence was fragmenting under the pressure of processing too many complex tactical scenarios simultaneously, causing individual infected to revert to basic survival instincts rather than coordinated assault behaviors. "The viral network is experiencing cascade failures," he announced over the communication system while monitoring the biological data streaming from his equipment. "When we force the collective consciousness to exceed its processing capacity, individual infected lose their connection to the network and revert to primitive zombie-like behavior patterns." His research revealed that the virus had evolved to create collective intelligence at the cost of individual cognitive resilience, making the entire system vulnerable to overload scenarios that traditional zombie viruses would have been immune to. The infected assault began collapsing as thousands of coordinated predators reverted to wandering corpses, stumbling over terrain they had previously navigated with military precision and failing to respond to tactical situations that had seemed impossible to overcome just minutes earlier. "We found their Achilles heel. The more sophisticated their collective intelligence becomes, the more vulnerable they are to system overloads that cause network-wide failures." Angela Rodriguez coordinated the counteroffensive as human defenders transitioned from desperate survival to systematic elimination of disoriented infected throughout the valley. Her naval strategic training proved invaluable in organizing pursuit teams that could capitalize on the infected's temporary vulnerability while avoiding the mistakes that might allow the viral network to re-establish coordination. "All units, begin systematic cleanup operations," she transmitted while directing teams equipped with captured infected communication devices that could monitor for signs of network restoration. "The infected collective consciousness is down but may attempt to reboot, so we need to eliminate individual infected before they can re-establish network connections." Thomas Blake led mountain teams in tracking down scattered infected who had wandered into remote areas during the network failure, while Patricia Davis organized medical teams to treat wounded defenders and ensure that any bite victims received immediate care to prevent new infections that might serve as restart points for the viral collective. The systematic elimination proceeded with ruthless efficiency as survivors who had spent months running and hiding finally had the opportunity to take offensive action against an enemy that had seemed invincible just hours earlier. The aftermath of the Battle of Glacier Valley marked the beginning of humanity's long road back from the brink of extinction, as news of the infected network's vulnerability spread to survivor communities across the continent through Jennifer Walsh's restored communication networks. The strategy that had saved the Montana camp was rapidly adapted and transmitted to other survivor groups, enabling coordinated operations that systematically dismantled infected collectives throughout North America by exploiting their computational limitations through strategic chaos creation. Captain Thompson established the first post-outbreak military command structure, coordinating regional operations that cleared major population centers by forcing infected networks into overload scenarios that rendered them vulnerable to conventional military tactics. Dr. Mitchell's research became the foundation for a new scientific understanding of viral collective intelligence, leading to the development of specialized equipment and tactics designed to prevent future outbreaks while ensuring that any resurgent infections could be quickly neutralized through network disruption strategies. Marcus Rodriguez's communication expertise proved crucial in rebuilding civilian infrastructure, creating robust networks that could coordinate reconstruction efforts while maintaining the vigilance necessary to detect and respond to any signs of viral resurgence. The children who had survived the outbreak, including Maria Gonzalez's daughter Sofia and the other young survivors from communities across the continent, became the foundation for humanity's rebuilt civilization, carrying both the memory of the near extinction and the knowledge necessary to prevent its recurrence. The infected who had once threatened to replace humanity as the dominant species on Earth became cautionary specimens in research facilities, their collective intelligence permanently disrupted but preserved for study to ensure that human civilization would never again face an existential threat from viral evolution. The Battle of Glacier Valley entered history as the moment when human ingenuity, cooperation, and adaptability proved that even in the face of seemingly impossible odds, organized resistance could triumph over evolutionary predators specifically designed to hunt and eliminate humanity, securing the future of civilization through the courage and sacrifice of ordinary people who refused to surrender to extinction.